They say you don't quit jobs, you quit bosses. And after what I went through, I can tell you that's the damn truth. My name's Daniel, and for years, I thought I'd found the perfect career. I worked for a mid-sized financial firm downtown. It wasn't Wall Street glamorous, but it was stable. Good salary, benefits, friendly coworkers, the kind of place you could see yourself climbing the ladder and retiring comfortably from. At least, that's how it used to feel. Everything changed when Chris walked in. Before we start, I just want to say that this is our new channel, and we're really working hard to bring you the best stories. So make sure to subscribe and support us to reach 1,000 subscribers very soon. Let's start the story. Chris was my new boss. Tall, polished, with that fake smile managers plaster on their face when they want you to think they're approachable. He shook everyone's hand on his first day, cracked jokes, promised he wasn't here to shake things up too much. But you know that feeling in your gut when someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes? Yeah, that was Chris. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to give him a chance. Everyone deserves that, right? And in the beginning, he kept things civil. He asked about our roles, our projects, pretended to care. But little by little, his mask slipped. It started with subtle things. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence in meetings, correct me in front of clients, even when I was right, rephrase my ideas as if they were his own, then nod when the executives praised his brilliant strategy. At first, I swallowed it. I needed the job. Rent wasn't going to pay itself, and the job market wasn't exactly kind. So I told myself, pick your battles, Daniel, don't make waves. But then the little things became patterns. Chris developed this habit of calling me out by name whenever something went wrong. A late email, Daniel dropped the ball. A client unsatisfied, Daniel should have handled it better. Funny thing though, when things went right, my name was never mentioned. It was his leadership, his initiative, his brilliance. My coworkers saw it too, but no one said a word. Who's going to stick their neck out for you when the boss is the one holding the axe? They'd pat me on the back in private, whisper, "Sorry man, that was rough in there," but silence reigned in the conference room. I'd go home every night exhausted, not from the work, but from the constant second-guessing, the mental gymnastics of figuring out how to survive another day under him without becoming his next scapegoat. And yet, I kept telling myself I could outlast him, that good work would speak for itself, that upper management would eventually see through him. I had no idea just how wrong I was, because Chris wasn't just your average arrogant boss. He was something worse, the kind of predator who doesn't just want power, he wants control. And to get it, he'd happily crush anyone who stood in his way. I didn't know it then, but I was already in his crosshairs. And soon, Chris wasn't just going to humiliate me in meetings or steal my ideas. No, he was about to take everything from me. But here's the thing about people like Chris. They always think they're untouchable. And that arrogance, that's exactly what makes them fall the hardest. Chris didn't waste much time before making me his favorite target. Every morning meeting felt like walking into a firing squad. He had this way of scanning the room, like a hawk searching for prey, and 9 times out of 10, his eyes landed on me. "Daniel, why isn't this report on my desk yet?" he'd bark, even if I had emailed it to him 2 days earlier. "Daniel, maybe next time, check your math before presenting numbers." Even when the numbers weren't mine, they came from his junior analyst. He had this subtle smirk, like he enjoyed watching me squirm. And the worst part, my colleagues just sat there, eyes glued to their laptops, pretending to type, as if acknowledging it might make them the next victim. I'd work late into the night to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. But it didn't matter. If Chris wanted to find fault, he would. He twisted everything. If I was early, I was trying too hard. If I was quiet, I was not contributing. If I spoke up, I was challenging his authority. No win, no escape. The real dagger came during a big quarterly meeting with the executives. I had spent weeks putting together a presentation, late nights, cancelled plans, pouring every ounce of effort into making it perfect. This was my shot to prove myself, to maybe, just maybe, get noticed for a promotion. The meeting started. I sat ready, slides queued up, palms sweaty, but excited. Then Chris cleared his throat. "Actually, before Daniel begins, I'd like to walk everyone through a project I've been working on." And just like that, my stomach dropped. He clicked to my slides, the deck I built, the analysis I'd slaved over. He walked through it point by point, word for word, and every time an executive nodded. He smiled like a proud genius. Not once did he mention my name. Not once did he look my way. By the end, the executives applauded his sharp insights and excellent preparation. I sat there, invisible, clenching my fists under the table. It didn't stop there. The next week, I found out I'd been passed over for a promotion, one I was basically guaranteed before Chris showed up. The reason? Concerns about leadership potential. Chris had rewritten my performance evaluation, marked me as inconsistent, lacking initiative, words that didn't match my work, but carried more weight coming from his mouth than mine. It was humiliating. And the worst part? He acted like he was doing me a favor. "Don't take it personally, Daniel," he said with that same fake smile. "Not everyone's cut out for leadership. Some people are just better in support roles." That was his nice way of saying, know your place. Every night I went home with a knot in my chest. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep this up. Should I quit? Should I confront him? Or just swallow my pride and endure it? I didn't know it then, but things were about to get much worse, because humiliating me in front of co-workers wasn't enough for Chris. No, he had something far bigger and far more destructive planned. And soon, he wouldn't just ruin my reputation, he'd rip the job right out from under me. I used to think humiliation was the worst Chris could throw at me. I was wrong. The real breaking point came out of nowhere. It was a Thursday afternoon, one of those dragging days when everyone's just waiting for Friday to roll around. I was at my desk, finishing up some spreadsheets when I got an email notification. Subject line, urgent, meeting in conference room 4. My stomach sank. Emails like that were never good. When I walked in, Chris was already there, sitting at the head of the table, arms folded, lips curled in that smug half smile. 2 HR reps sat on either side of him, folders in front of them. "Daniel, take a seat," Chris said, voice dripping with fake politeness. I sat. The room felt colder than it should have. One of the HR reps cleared her throat. "We've received some troubling reports, Daniel. Apparently there have been irregularities in your client billing logs." I blinked. "What? Irregularities?" "I've double-checked those logs myself." Chris leaned forward, sliding a printed sheet across the table. "Then maybe you can explain why some of your client hours look inflated." I picked up the paper. My hands started shaking. The logs weren't mine. They looked like my entries, my formatting, but they weren't. Someone had added hours I hadn't worked, signed off with my initials. It didn't take long for my brain to connect the dots. Chris had access to the system. Chris was the one always hovering, asking about my projects. Chris was the one who stood to gain if I went down. "Wait," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "This isn't me. Someone's altered these." Chris tilted his head, feigning disappointment. "Daniel, come on. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just admit you made a mistake. Maybe HR will go easy on you." HR looked at me expectantly, pens poised. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. "No, this isn't a mistake. This is deliberate. Someone's setting me up." Chris chuckled under his breath. "Always an excuse." The HR rep spoke again. "Daniel, we'll need to suspend you pending further investigation." Suspend. The word echoed in my skull like a gunshot. I was being kicked out, not for poor performance, not for a missed deadline, but for fraud. I walked out of that building in a daze. My co-workers avoided my eyes as I passed, whispering behind their screens. I could feel their judgment burning into my back. Outside, I sat on the steps, staring at my shaking hands. Everything I'd worked for, my reputation, my career, my future, was unraveling because of one man's ambition. And the worst part, he was winning. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch, lights off, replaying every interaction with Chris in my head. The smirks, the helpful suggestions, the way he always seemed to be 2 steps ahead. I'd thought I was dealing with a bully, but no. Chris was a strategist, a manipulator, a wolf in a tailored suit. And if I didn't do something, he'd bury me for good. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than fear. Anger. Because Chris had crossed the line. He didn't just want to humiliate me. He wanted to destroy me. And if that was the game he wanted to play, then fine. I'd play it too. Suspension. That word haunted me for days. I stayed locked in my apartment, blinds drawn, replaying every single thing Chris had done to me. The humiliation, the stolen credit, the forged logs. Every memory fueled the fire in my chest. But I wasn't going to let him win. Not anymore. At first, I thought about quitting, finding a new job, walking away. But every time I imagined Chris smirking at my empty desk, basking in victory, my stomach churned. No, I wasn't going to run. I was going to fight back. The question was, how? Then it hit me. Chris wasn't just a bully. He was careless. He thrived on manipulation, but he always underestimated people. And that arrogance, that was his weak spot. So I started digging. I remembered something. Chris always bragged about his client dinners, the late nights closing deals at fancy restaurants. But I knew the billing system. Every expense had to be logged. If he was padding his lifestyle on the company's dime, there'd be a trail. I pulled up old emails on my personal laptop. Over the years, I'd backed up a lot of communication, not because I planned to use it, but because I was meticulous. And there it was. Receipts, timestamps, calendar invites. I compared them with the company billing records I still had access to through archived PDFs. And what I found? Inconsistencies. Big ones. Chris had been billing client dinners on nights he was actually at home. I knew because he'd sent the team late-night emails during those hours. He'd billed for travel expenses that didn't line up with his flight confirmations. He'd charged the company for luxury hotels in cities we didn't even have clients in. The deeper I dug, the bigger the pile of evidence became. But raw evidence wasn't enough. HR hadn't believed me before. If I came back with claims against Chris, it would look like retaliation. I needed undeniable proof, something that couldn't be explained away. So I set a trap. I still had friends in the office, quiet ones who kept their heads down but saw more than they let on. I reached out to one, a guy named Marcus. He'd been on the receiving end of Chris's sarcasm before, so he understood. Look, I told him, I need your help. If I can prove Chris is stealing from the company, it helps both of us. But I need someone on the inside. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. What do you need? I explained my plan. Chris had a pattern. He loved to corner me in meetings, spring fake accusations, catch me off guard. I knew if I went back in, he'd try to do it again, but this time, I'd be ready. I gave Marcus a small recording device. Just keep this in the conference room. Chris won't be able to help himself. Sure enough, the opportunity came sooner than expected. HR called me in for a follow-up discussion. Chris was there, of course, sitting smug at the table. The meeting started the same way as before. Accusations, vague claims, evidence that didn't quite add up. But this time, I stayed calm. Interesting, I said, voice steady. Because if we're talking about billing irregularities, maybe we should discuss your client dinners, like the one on May 12th. You billed the company $600 at Le Jardin, right? Chris's eyes flickered, just for a second. Sure, he said quickly. I was entertaining a client. I smiled. Funny, because you sent the team an email at 8:47 p.m. that night. From your apartment Wi-Fi. I have the metadata. The room went silent. HR shifted uncomfortably. Chris's jaw tightened. That's when I leaned forward. I think it's time we stop talking about me and start talking about you. I walked out of that meeting knowing I had him. The recording Marcus placed, it caught everything. Chris trying to spin lies, then stumbling when confronted with specifics. His arrogance had tripped him up, just like I knew it would. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Because this wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. The days after that meeting were strange. HR hadn't said much. They thanked me for my concerns and said they'd review the matter thoroughly. But I knew better. Big companies like mine didn't move fast, not unless their hand was forced. That's why I didn't wait. While HR was reviewing, I was building, piece by piece, brick by brick. I turned my scattered evidence into a fortress. Spreadsheets of expense reports matched with email metadata. Screenshots of calendar invites, photos of receipts that Chris had casually left on his desk over the years. I even tracked down old vendors who confirmed Chris had never shown up to client dinners he'd billed for. But the crown jewel, Marcus's recording. It wasn't just Chris's lies that the mic had captured. It was his tone, the smugness, the contempt, the little chuckle when he thought he was untouchable. You couldn't spin that. You couldn't explain it away. That audio was a knife, sharp and undeniable. I packaged everything into a clean, airtight report. No drama, no rants, just cold, hard facts. And instead of sending it to HR directly, I went one level higher. I emailed it to the board of directors, not just one member, but all of them, each message personalized, each one pointing out how Chris's fraud wasn't just misbehavior, it was theft. Theft from the company, theft from shareholders, theft from them personally. And then I waited. It only took 48 hours. That Monday morning, I walked into the office for the first time in weeks. My badge still worked, though I expected security to stop me at any moment. But instead of hostility, I was met with whispers, side glances, people staring at me like I had grown wings. Something was happening. Around 10 a.m., the call came over the PA system. "Chris Bennett, please report to the executive conference room immediately." I didn't have to follow him to know what was happening, but curiosity burned too strong. So I walked past the corridor, leading to the glass-walled boardroom, and there it was. Chris, sitting at the long mahogany table, face pale. Around him sat the entire board, stiff and cold. The CEO, normally calm, was leaning forward, his voice sharp. Papers were spread across the table. My report, I realized instantly. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught snippets through the glass. Falsified expenses, breach of trust, serious financial misconduct. Chris was stammering. Sweat glistened at his temple. For once, his arrogance had vanished. Then, the moment I'll never forget, two security guards walked in. The CEO slid a folder across the table, spoke a few final words, and pointed at the door. Chris stood up slowly, his face red with humiliation, and tried to argue. But the guards didn't flinch. They escorted him out, right past the rows of employees who had once been his victims. The entire office went silent, every eye following as the mighty Chris Bennett, the man who thought he was untouchable, was marched out like a criminal. And me? I sat at my desk, calm, collected, like nothing unusual was happening. But inside, I was on fire. The taste of justice was sweeter than anything I'd ever known. The best part? Later that afternoon, I got an email. Subject line, "Private meeting request from the CEO." I don't think I breathed the entire walk to the CEO's office. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through water. This was it. Either I was about to be thanked, or I was about to be destroyed in a quieter, cleaner way. The CEO's office was intimidating on a normal day. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive oak deck, and walls lined with framed awards and news clippings. But that morning, it felt like walking into the lion's den. "Daniel," he said, standing as I walked in. His tone was calm, but there was a weight to it. "Close the door." I obeyed. My heart thudded so loud, I swore he could hear it. Then, to my surprise, he extended his hand. "Sit down. You've done this company a great service." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "Sir?" He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Chris Bennett was a parasite. A talented one, but a parasite nonetheless. He's been on our radar for months, but we never had proof strong enough to act. Your report gave us exactly what we needed. A strange mix of relief and anger swirled in me. They knew, they'd suspected all along, and still let him torment me and everyone else. The CEO must have seen the flash in my eyes, because he sighed. "You should understand, Daniel, these things are delicate. You don't remove a VP without airtight evidence. Otherwise, it's chaos. You gave us that evidence." I nodded slowly, though part of me hated the politics of it. Still, Chris was gone. That was what mattered. But then the CEO leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I want you to consider something. With Chris out, there's going to be a leadership vacuum in his department. His projects, his clients, his team, all of it needs stability. And frankly, after what you pulled off, you've shown initiative, courage, loyalty." My stomach flipped. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it. Inside was a promotion letter. A big one. Not just a minor bump, but a leap into management, with a salary that made my head spin. I looked up at him. "Why me? There are senior managers more qualified." He smiled faintly. "Because none of them stood up. You did. And we reward that kind of grit here." I should have been ecstatic. This was everything I'd wanted. Recognition, respect, a chance to prove myself. But as I sat there, I realized something unsettling. This wasn't just about rewarding me. It was about using me. The board wanted someone to stabilize things quickly, someone tied to Chris's downfall, someone they could present as a hero to distract from the scandal. In other words, I was useful, and usefulness could vanish as quickly as it appeared. Still, I signed the letter. What choice did I have? As I left the office, promotion packet in hand, I caught sight of Chris being escorted through the lobby with his belongings in a cardboard box. His eyes met mine for a split second. Hudge, humiliation, pure hatred. For a moment, I thought he might say something, but he didn't. He just turned and walked out the doors, disappearing into the city like a ghost. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the promotion letter. I'd won. I'd beaten him. I should have felt triumphant. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, because men like Chris don't go quietly, and if I knew him at all, he was already plotting his revenge. The first few weeks after Chris's downfall felt surreal. People treated me differently. Suddenly, colleagues who used to avoid me in the cafeteria were inviting me to lunch. Emails came with congratulations in the subject line. Even Marcus, the quiet analyst who had slipped me the recording, started walking a little taller, like he was proud to have played a part. On paper, my life had changed. New office, a bigger paycheck. My name whispered in meetings where it had never been mentioned before. But beneath the surface, something felt off. It started small. My car alarm went off in the middle of the night, 3 times in 1 week. At first, I brushed it off as city noise or some drunk passing by. But then, one morning, I came outside to find a deep scratch running across the driver's side door. Coincidence? Maybe. Then, one evening, I stayed late at the office. When I finally shut down my laptop and headed for the parking garage, I noticed something strange. A cigarette butt smoldering on the ground right next to my car, still fresh. But the garage was empty. That night, as I drove home, my eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror. A black sedan seemed to follow me for several blocks. When I finally made a sharp turn into a gas station, it slowed, then disappeared. My gut told me everything I needed to know. Chris wasn't done. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, but the final confirmation came 2 weeks later. An envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address, no markings. Inside was a single photo, me sitting at my desk, taken through the glass wall of my new office. My blood went cold. There was a note on the back, written in bold, messy handwriting. Enjoy the view while it lasts. I sat in silence for a long time, the letter trembling in my hand. Chris had money. He had connections. He'd built a career on manipulation, on bending rules, on always landing on his feet. Getting fired wasn't the end for him. It was just the start of a new game. And now, I wasn't just his former co-worker. I was his enemy. I didn't sleep the night I found that photo. Every shadow in my apartment felt like it was watching me. Every creak in the floorboards made my heart lurch. By morning, I was exhausted. But I knew one thing. If I didn't act, Chris would. The problem was, I didn't know how. Chris was smart. Smarter than most. He wouldn't just come at me directly. No, he'd find ways to chip away at me, destroy me slowly, until I was nothing but a cautionary tale whispered around the office. So I did the only thing I could think of. I called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. "You sound like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't," I admitted. Then I told him about the car, the cigarette, the sedan, the photo. There was a long silence on the other end before he spoke. "Daniel, you know he's not going to stop. Guys like Chris don't just move on. He's obsessed now. You embarrassed him. You took everything from him." I rubbed my temples. "So what do I do? Go to the police and say, my old boss might be following me around? They'll laugh me out of the station." Marcus hesitated. Then his voice dropped lower. "There's another option." That's when he told me something that chilled me even more than the photo had. Apparently, Marcus had been digging into Chris's background even before I exposed him. He'd found things. A hidden LLC registered in another state. Shell companies moving money in strange patterns. A property in Miami purchased under a different name. Chris was laundering, Marcus said quietly. "I can't prove it fully, but the pieces are there. If we connect the dots, we could bury him, not just career-wise, legally." I leaned back into my chair, my chest tight. It was risky, incredibly risky. But Marcus was right. If Chris had truly gone dirty, then that was leverage. "Are you saying we should, investigate him ourselves?" Marcus chuckled, though it was humorless. "You brought him down once. Why stop now? If we get proof, the cops won't laugh you out of the station. They'll arrest him." The idea was dangerous. Stupid even. I was an analyst, not some private investigator. But when I pictured Chris's face, that glare in the lobby as security escorted him out, the hatred burning in his eyes, I knew Marcus was right. It wasn't enough to defend myself. I had to finish this. That night, Marcus came over with a laptop and a USB drive. We sat at my kitchen table like two conspirators, the glow of the screen lighting our tired faces. "Okay," Marcus said, pulling up spreadsheets and transaction logs he'd copied from old servers before Chris was booted. "This is where it starts." For the next 3 hours, we combed through files, piecing together the puzzle Chris thought he'd hidden. Fake invoices, payments to consulting firms that didn't exist, transfers routed through shell accounts, evidence. Every breadcrumb made the picture clearer. Chris wasn't just a manipulator at work, he was a criminal. And if Marcus and I could prove it, we wouldn't just stop it, we'd end it. But as midnight ticked past, one thought gnawed at me. If Chris found out what we were doing, he wouldn't hesitate to destroy us first. For days, Marcus and I worked in secret. Every evening after work, he'd come to my apartment, and we'd hunch over laptops, piecing together Chris's dirty little empire. It felt surreal, like we were part of some Netflix thriller. Two office guys turned amateur detectives, chasing a man who had everything to lose. But it didn't take long before we realized something. Chris wasn't blind. He knew. The first clue came on a Thursday. Marcus had just left my place when I noticed a man sitting in a parked car across the street. Engine running, lights off, just sitting. I watched from my window for nearly 20 minutes before the car finally pulled away. The second clue came the next morning. My email inbox had a strange new message. No subject line, no sender, just an attachment. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a single line of text, typed in bold. You should have stopped while you were ahead. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, and then, like a fool, I clicked the attachment. The photo loaded slowly, pixel by pixel. When it finally appeared, I felt sick. It was Marcus, standing outside his apartment, taken from across the street. My first instinct was to call him, to warn him. But before I could, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Keep digging. And oh, he's next. I dropped the phone. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. Chris was laying a trap, baiting me, waiting for me to make a mistake. When I told Marcus, he went pale, but tried to laugh it off. He's bluffing, just scare tactics. But I could hear the tremor in his voice. We both knew Chris was capable of more than just threats. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced my apartment, replaying everything in my mind. Chris was always 10 steps ahead, always pulling strings no one else could see. If we didn't act soon, he'd crush us before we ever got a chance to expose him. I poured myself a drink, sat at the table, and stared at the files we'd collected. There was enough here to raise suspicion, but not enough to lock him away. We needed more. But to get more, we'd have to step deeper into Chris's world. Marcus suggested something insane, breaking into Chris's old office storage unit. Apparently, Chris had kept hard copies of sensitive documents there. Contracts, ledgers, things too risky to store digitally. If we got our hands on those, it could be game over. But the thought chilled me, because if we went there, we'd be walking straight into Chris's territory. And if he was waiting for us, it wouldn't just be a trap, it could be the end. Marcus wasn't joking. He knew about Chris's old storage unit, a plain anonymous facility just outside the city. He'd stumbled across it back when we were still working under Chris, though he'd never told anyone. "Daniel," he said, voice low as if Chris could somehow hear him through the walls. "If there's proof that can bury him, it'll be in there." Every instinct in me screamed this was reckless, illegal, dangerous. But then I thought about the photo of Marcus outside his apartment, the text that threatened him, the cigarette ember glowing in the dark outside my building. Chris wasn't just playing office politics anymore. He was playing for keeps, so we planned it out. Saturday night, after the storage office closed, Marcus managed to swipe an old key card from a former co-worker who'd rented there. "The codes haven't changed in years," he said confidently, though I could see the nerves written across his face. We drove out under the cover of darkness. The facility was eerily quiet. Rows of metal roll-up doors stretching endlessly, the sodium lights flickering overhead. My palms were slick against the steering wheel as I parked at the far corner, away from the cameras. Marcus checked his watch. "Midnight. Now or never," he muttered. The card worked. The gates slid open with a groan that seemed deafening in the still night. We slipped inside. Chris's unit was number 111. When we reached it, Marcus knelt with a small lock-picking kit he'd bought online. "You watch," he whispered. "This'll take 2 minutes." I stood there, heart hammering, scanning the shadows. Every hum of the lights, every passing car in the distance made me flinch. Finally, the padlock clicked. The metal door rattled as Marcus pulled it up. Inside was chaos. Stacks of cardboard boxes, filing cabinets pushed against the walls, a folding table with an old laptop resting on top. It smelled of dust and old paper, with a faint chemical tang I couldn't place. We stepped inside, shutting the door behind us. Marcus flicked on a small flashlight, its narrow beam cutting through the darkness. "Okay," he breathed. "Start with the boxes." I opened the first one. Contracts. Dozens of them. Some looked legitimate. Consulting agreements, vendor deals. But others were fake. The names names were generic, the signatures mismatched. Marcus grinned. This is it. This is what we need. We kept digging, and the deeper we went, the worse it got. Ledger books with cash transactions, bank slips linking shell companies, even photos of men I didn't recognize with notes scribbled on the backs. This is money laundering, Marcus whispered, and maybe blackmail too. But then I froze. In the corner of the unit was a black duffel bag, heavier than the rest. I unzipped it, and my blood ran cold. Bundles of cash, neatly stacked, wrapped in rubber bands, easily hundreds of thousands of dollars, and underneath them, a gun. I staggered back. Marcus, he's armed! Before Marcus could respond, a sound echoed from outside. Footsteps. We both froze. The shuffle of boots on concrete. The low jingle of keys. Someone was here. Marcus killed the flashlight. We crouched behind the boxes, holding our breath. The footsteps stopped right outside the unit, and then the metallic scrape of another key sliding into the lock. The door rattled. Chris was here. The door screeched upward, light from the hallway spilling into the storage unit like a spotlight. Marcus and I crouched low, pressed against the boxes, praying the darkness would hide us. The footsteps entered, slow, deliberate, and then I heard his voice, calm, steady, almost amused. Daniel, Marcus, I know you're here. My stomach dropped. Chris stepped inside, shutting the unit door behind him with a heavy clang. The sound echoed like a prison cell locking shut. Marcus gripped my arm, whispering so faintly I barely heard it. We have to move. But before we could, Chris kicked the black duffel bag across the floor. Cash spilled out in neat bundles. The gun slid, metallic and menacing, until it stopped just a few feet from us. Curious, isn't it? Chris said, his voice cutting through the dark. All that money, all that power, and you two thought you could steal it, or worse, use it against me. Marcus finally snapped. He jumped up, flashlight beam blinding Chris in the eyes. You're finished, Chris. We've got your contracts, your fake companies, everything. The cops are going to bury you. Chris didn't flinch. If anything, he smiled. Marcus. He stepped forward slowly, hands raised, like he was talking to a child. Do you really think I haven't played this game before? Do you really think I don't know exactly how to erase two noisy little men who don't know when to quit? My blood ran cold. Chris moved closer, and the flashlight beam wavered in Marcus's trembling hands. I could see it now. Chris wasn't afraid. He was in control. Even here, even caught red-handed, he had the confidence of someone who already knew the ending. I couldn't let Marcus stand there alone. I rose too, fists clenched. You can't scare us anymore, Chris. We're not your pawns. Chris turned his gaze on me. His eyes were sharp, piercing, like he was sizing up not just my words, but my soul. Not pawns? He said softly. Daniel, you've always been a pawn. From the moment I hired you, from the moment you thought you were rising in this company, you were exactly where I wanted you. And Marcus? He chuckled darkly. He's not even worth mentioning. Marcus lunged. I barely had time to react before Marcus shoved Chris back against the wall, the flashlight clattering to the floor. They struggled, grunting, fists flying in the dark. The gun lay just feet away, glinting in the faint light from the crack under the door. Chris's elbow caught Marcus in the ribs, sending him staggering. Chris reached for the gun. Marcus! I shouted. I dove, sliding across the concrete, my hand smacking down on the weapon just as Chris's fingers brushed it. For a moment, we wrestled, both of us gripping cold steel, neither letting go. Do you really want to pull that trigger, Daniel? Chris hissed, face inches from mine. His breath was hot, venomous. Do you really want to cross that line? My hands shook. My mind raced. Marcus, gasping for air, scrambled to his feet and grabbed one of the heavy ledger books. With a desperate cry, he smashed it across Chris's temple. Chris collapsed, blood trickling from his hairline, groaning but not unconscious. Daniel, go, Marcus shouted. Take the files. Take the drive. This is our chance. I hesitated, staring at Chris on the floor. He looked up at me, dazed but grinning through the blood. You think this ends me? He croaked. You're already dead, men. Chris lay on the concrete floor, blood trickling down his face, his grin a grotesque mask of defiance. Marcus was already stuffing the files and hard drive back into the duffel. Daniel, we don't have time. Let's move. I stood frozen for a moment, gun still in my hand, staring at Chris. He was hurt, but his eyes told me he wasn't broken. He would keep coming for us, no matter what. You think you're safe, he rasped. You think the cops will believe you over me? I own them. I own everything. Something in me snapped. I dropped the gun, leaned in close, and whispered, "Not anymore." Marcus yanked my arm, and together we bolted out of the storage unit, sprinting into the night. My heart hammered as we weaved through the maze of lockers, the echo of Chris's laughter chasing us, until the exit doors slammed shut behind us. The next few days were chaos. We copied the files, backed them up in 3 different places. We didn't dare go to the police directly, not with Chris's reach. Instead, Marcus contacted a journalist he trusted, a guy who'd been digging into corporate corruption for years, but never had the smoking gun. We gave him everything, and then we waited. 2 weeks later, the headlines exploded. CEO Chris Tye exposed in massive fraud and money laundering operation. FBI raids Tye Industries headquarters. Whistleblowers uncover empire built on lies. Television anchors called it the scandal of the decade. Cameras swarmed the courthouse as Chris was dragged inside, wrists shackled, his expensive suit stained with sweat. His trademark smirk was gone. I watched it all on TV with Marcus by my side. We didn't say much, just sat there, breathing it in. Justice. Real, undeniable justice. In the weeks that followed, Chris's empire crumbled. His companies were seized, his allies scattered like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Employees who once feared him spoke out. Victims of his schemes finally had a voice. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear. One evening, Marcus and I met at a quiet diner. Over greasy fries and lukewarm coffee, we laughed, really laughed, for the first time since this nightmare began. "You realize," Marcus said, shaking his head, "we just brought down a man who thought he was untouchable." "Yeah," I said with a small smile. "Turns out even kings can bleed." We clinked our coffee mugs like champagne glasses. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I thought about Chris's last words. "You're already dead, men." Maybe in his twisted world that was true, but standing there, breathing free air, watching justice finally take its course, I knew he was wrong. He was the one who had lost, and we were finally alive. Months later, I got an email from the journalist. The story we'd given him had been nominated for a Pulitzer. He wanted to meet, to thank us properly. I closed the laptop and looked out my window at the city lights. Chris Tye had tried to own everything, but in the end, the truth owned him. And as long as people like Marcus and me were willing to fight back, no empire, no matter how powerful, could stand forever.